Mahlo and Chiron, they married Moabite's daughter. The name of Moabite's daughter who are married by these sons were Orpah and Ruth. And we see that after some time, also the boys died in the land of Moab. Now we see that Naomi was left. Only with her 2 daughters in row. So tunaona ya kwamba the family ilitoka watu 4 in the land of Bethlehem. Now hiyo family imebakia sasa only 1 woman and 2 daughters in row. Now we see that in the land of Moab, Naomi akasikia kwamba God has remembered the house of Bethlehem, Judah. Na sasa akaanza kujiuliza, waacha nirudi sasa kwenye nilikuwa nimetoka. So in chapter 1 from verse 6 to 18, we see that it is now the return of Ruth, the return of Naomi and her 2 daughters in row to Bethlehem, Judah. And we see that in that particular time, akawaambia hao watoto wake wa in-laws, you go back to remain behind as I go to the land of Bethlehem. But we see that she gave them a chance ya kurudi. Na akawaambia, hata nikiweza pata mtoto mwingine, will you wait for my sons to grow up, waoe? And then we see that from this of Orpah ana decide kurudi. But Ruth vows. Tunaweza wekewa the book of Ruth chapter 1 verse 16. That will be our anchor verse for this chapter. Tunaona ya kwamba hapa ndipo Ruth anakuwa very determined ya kwamba she must accompany Naomi back to her land of origin. Then we see that after Ruth was not convinced to go back, she accompanies Naomi. And in verse 19 to 22, we see that them arriving at Bethlehem. We see that they walked and they came back to Bethlehem. And that when the Bethlehem people saw that they had come back, they were very, very glad. Nilikuwa najiuliza, who was Naomi in the land of Bethlehem? Such that, imagine, mwanamke mmoja amerudi na 1 daughter-in-law, and the whole city is aware amerudi and they are glad. Nikajiuliza, what impact was Naomi making in the land of Bethlehem, Judah? Then we have to, we see that because of the feedback of the people who are there, Naomi anawaambia, hata msiniite Naomi kwa sababu ya machungu ambayo nimeonea in the land of Moab, but instead call me Mara. And then we see that she gives herself a new name because of the things that she had gone through in the land of Moab. And then we go to the chapter 2. It has chapter verse 1 to verse 23. We see that there are now introduction of Boaz. Boaz was a kinsman to Ruth, to Elimelech. Remember in Israel, boma zilikuwa zinahesabiwa na according to the men, the house of Elimelech. Though you are succeeded by the wives, it would be the house of Elimelech. Ilikuwa hivyo. So kinsman ni kama mtu wa ukoo, mtu wa jamii. So we are introduced to a man named Boaz. Boaz was a wealthy man, and it seems hakuwa ameoa at that particular time, the time they were returning. We see that Ruth and Naomi returned to the house of Bethlehem when it was the beginning of harvesting of barley. Remember, this was the land that was having famine, but now we see that God has remembered Bethlehem, and now they were harvesting. It was harvesting time. So we have part 2. There is Ruth and Boaz's introduction from verse 2 to verse 7. Then we see that Ruth was living with Naomi when they returned to the land of Bethlehem. And one day Ruth asked Naomi for permission aende huko nje pia akafanya gathering of sheep. Tulikuwa tunasema in Kikuyu inaitwa kama kuhura kireyo, like unagojea watu kwanza waende harvest, and then pia wewe unaingia pale kwa ile shamba unajaribu kuokota kenye kimebakishwa. So we see that it happens that Ruth goes to the land of Boaz, and Boaz notices, hey, leo kuna mgeni. So Boaz summons the head of the reapers, anamuuliza nani huyo, and then she is told it is a Moabite daughter of who is a daughter-in-law to Naomi. And then we have when Boaz hears this, she provides for Ruth. This is from verse 8 to verse 17. And then when Boaz is introduced to Ruth, na anasikia venye Ruth amekuwa akifanya kwa shamba yake, she officially welcomed Ruth to glean in her field. na sio tu to green after the reapers, anampatia pia authority ya green among the sheaves. Anamwambia wewe hata hutashinda ukiwafuata, gather with the reapers. And then we see that Ruth returns after day's work. So this is from verse 18 to 19. She after the days is over, Ruth takes the corrections back to her mother-in-law, mwenye alikuwa ampatia ruhusa aende aka-gather sheaves. And then we see that this time Ruth is Naomi is very encouraged by the harvest of Ruth. Na anamuuliza, leo umeshinda wapi? And then Ruth goes ahead to mention to Naomi that she was correcting from the land of Boaz. And Naomi is very impressed. She says to her, usiende hata kwa shamba ingine huko because I think Naomi noticed something. Anamwambia, because even though we are in the season of harvesting, usiende kwa shamba zingine zote. Kumbuka, everyone in Israel, they were harvesting. But now Naomi narrows down to Ruth. Anamwambia, usiende kwa mashamba zingine. Hapo wamekupatia chance, endelea na wao mpaka siku hata maliza kuharvest. So, these were the lessons that were drawn from the two chapters. That number one, God is a restorer of opportunities. We see that the chapter begins that there was famine in the land of Bethlehem. But now we see when Naomi and Ruth goes back, it was God had remembered them, and now they were harvesting. A land that was experiencing a famine, now God has remembered them and have given them harvest. Now they are having abundance. And also, we should be thankful in all circumstances. Tunaona ya kwamba in chapter 2, verse 14, we see that because Ruth kuna venye ali appreciate Boaz na Thanksgiving until Boaz went ahead, and because of her Thanksgiving, Boaz akamwambia hata usigoje wa harvest together with them. Na pia when Ruth continued thanking Boaz went ahead and invited her when they were partaking the day's meal, and Boaz went ahead and gave her parched corn. Parched corn ni kama nilikuwa naona it's a kind of grain venye imeroastiwa. It's like a special meal, such that in that particular time Ruth have more, and mpaka anapata ya kubakisha anapelekea her mother-in-law. Also, another point that came out was the wisdom of life. After Ruth narrates to Naomi kwenye ameshinda akiokota bare, Naomi anaanza kumadvise Ruth how she should start behaving herself before Boaz. And as my colleague will take over, mutaona ya kwamba venye aliendelea kumadvise and the results that they got from that advice. So that was it from the two chapters.
Bwana asifiwe. Nimpige makofi vizuri. Bwana asifiwe. We are doing the book of Ruth. Tunafanya recaps. I'll be taking you through chapter 3 and chapter 4, and I know God is going to bless you. So here in chapter 3, we meet Naomi, the mother-in-law, and Ruth. Hapa tunaona they had come back to Bethlehem. Now there was harvest. So many harvest. Yes, there was harvest. And when there's harvest, there's plenty for those who are there. And in those ancient days, there was even for those who are passing by. So here we see Ruth now having a plan. She wanted this daughter-in-law to get somebody to marry her, because she had no son left. She had no one to marry this lady who had come with her. Remember, this lady in chapter 1 verse 9, she had said that your God is going to be my God, and your people are going to be my people. So she had to look for something for her. So here we see in chapter 3, from verse 1 to verse 14, we see now the plan of Naomi and even how she was going to get her husband to marry her. So Naomi had told Ruth there's a kinsman who is near, who is supposed to marry her. Now here, after Naomi had been introduced to Ruth, Ruth had been introduced to Boaz. Now we see Naomi telling Ruth the plans on how she was supposed to do. We see Ruth going to the threshing floor. She followed the guidelines that she was told by Naomi strictly. She was told, go and wait for Boaz to eat and drink. And when he is merry, go and lie at his feet and wait for him to give you instructions. Here we see Ruth going, taking the instructions carefully. She went, and in verse 9, when Boaz realized there was somebody at his feet, he asked, who are you? Then Ruth replied, I'm your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garments. I want you to marry me. So she told her what she had come for. Again, going forward, then Boaz replied, the Lord bless you, my daughter. He replied, this kindness is greater than which you showed earlier, because they had met earlier. They had discussed, they had exchanged some conversation. So she said what she wanted. And we can see the plans of Boaz. Boaz did not want anybody to notice that there was a lady that had slept at the threshing floor because she was not married to him. Here from verse 14, we see that when it reached morning, Ruth woke up very early in the morning and she wanted to leave. But Boaz told her, spread the shawl that you have. And he poured her barley and she went back. And when she went back, Ruth went back to his mother-in-law with food that she was given by Boaz. And when she went back to the mother-in-law inquired what had transpired. And Ruth told her everything. And here, the plan of Naomi, I see it succeeding. Because whatever Naomi had told Ruth, it had come to pass very well. So Naomi told her daughter-in-law, wait until you find out what is going to happen. The man will not rest until the matter is settled today. That is in verse 18. In chapter 4, here we meet Boaz going to the gate. This was the meeting place in the old days in Israel. If you wanted something, you had to go to the gate of the village. That's where Boaz saw the person who was closer to Naomi than him. That person who was supposed to marry Ruth. Here in verse 4, chapter 4, verse 1, meanwhile, Boaz went up, chapter 4, verse 1, Boaz went straight to the public square and took his place there. Before long, the closer relative, the one mentioned earlier by Boaz, strolled by. Step aside, old friend, said Boaz. Take a seat. The man sat down. So remember, Boaz took 10 elders to come and witness if this person who was closer than him, who was supposed to marry Ruth, he took 10 elders. They sat down and they asked the kinsman, the redeemer, if he could buy the land that was left back by Elimelech. So this man thought that it was just land. He did not know that if you buy somebody's land, a person who had died in those old days of Israel, if a person dies, when you buy his belongings, you are supposed to redeem his name, and you take whatever that was his. So here we see the kinsman redeemer was told, if you buy this land, you are going to take even Naomi, and you take Ruth, the widow of Mahlon. But the kinsman redeemer, akati aliona hivi alisema hapana. He refused. He said, no, I'm not going to redeem it, because there were other accompaniments that were included in this negotiation. So Boaz, on that day, we see him buying the land, and in chapter 4, in verse 7, in those days, when, kwa sababu siku hizi kuna title, ati ukiuza ama kuna venye kama kuna mali ukienda ukinunua kitu, you can see how they take part in the negotiation. In verse 7, we see here they exchange sandals. In Israel, wakati ulikuwa ukinunua a property, unapatiwa a sandal, so that no one is going to claim it back. So we see him buying the land, taking Naomi, the property of Elimelech, even marrying the widow of Mahlon, who was Ruth. And here we see they were blessed. And the people of the village were very happy when Naomi, and when Ruth had given birth. And in verse 17, the women, verse 17, chapter 4, and the neighborhood women started calling him Naomi's boy, baby boy. But his real name was Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. So we see even the village rejoicing. And they gave him the name Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. Here we see Ruth falling into the genealogy of Jesus Christ through becoming the great-grandmother of David. What do we learn in this book, in these 2 chapters zenye ambazo tumesoma? First, tunaona the part of obedience. Tunaona Ruth becoming very obedient and very keen to instructions that she was given very strictly. Kama sasa nikikuambia amka, toka hapa, enda kule, aulizi swali, you just obey. So we see Ruth obeying and following instructions to the letter. The other one, Ruth trusted her mother-in-law very well. I think the way she had known the mother-in-law made her trust her. She trusted the mother-in-law very well. Kwa sababu kata alipomwambia, go when he has eaten and drunk, go and uende hapo chini, hapo kwa miguu yake. Hakumwambia hapo juu, alimwambia uende hapo kwa miguu yake. And she followed it very well. Alienda na akakaa pale. Again, Ruth waited patiently. Kwa sababu tunaangalia in chapter 3 verse 18. Wakati alipoambia Boaz, I want you to marry me, Boaz akamwambia, wait until I go and find the person who is closer than me. Aliongojea, hakukuwa na haraka. She waited and everything went well. The other person I'm looking at Boaz. Boaz was a person of integrity and a very faithful man. Kwa sababu wakati aligundua there is a lady at the feet. You can imagine sahi kungekuwa aje kama ni wakati huu ustukie kuna mtu kwa miguu mwenye ambaye wewe unamjua na alikuwa ameshapatiwa story yake. Alikuwa ameambiwa this is a widow, ana mtu na ako hapa. So wakati kama huu Boaz was faithful. Hakumguza. He waited, akamwambia hapana, this is what we're supposed to do. So we can see the integrity that was with Boaz. The other one, Boaz was not in a hurry. to go into sin. The same way venye pia sisi tunahitajika, before you do something, you are not supposed to be in a hurry to do something chenye ambacho labda utakuja ku regret later. So here we see Boaz akichukua the steps zenye ambazo zinahitajika, because he went, he called the elders, and when he had called the elders, he told them, this is what I want to do, and including the purchasing of the land, including everything that he has done. So we see him doing that. The other one, follow God in every way. When we wait for God's plan to fall in, the great grandmother of David, and she was in the genealogy of Jesus Christ through kuolewa na Boaz. So everything is for God. Na Mungu awabariki sana.